the brain stem composed of midbrain, pons and medulla. Midbrain around the cerebral aqueduct, groups of cell bodies and tracts connect the cerebrum to the lower parts of the spinal cord. Pons situated in front of the cerebellum, nerve fibers that connect to the two hemispheres of the cerebellum as well as the brain and spinal nuclei acts as relay stations. Now, this is the sagittal section of the brain. Now, you can see the corpus callosum, the fourth ventricle, pons, medulla oblongata, and you can see the cerebellum in sagittal section. It is like a folia, and this is the third ventricle. Now, brain stem, medulla between the pons and the spinal cord, medulla oblongata between the pons and the spinal cord. White matter outside, grey inside. Relay station for sensory nerves passing from the spinal cord to the cerebrum. This is very important. Relay station for the brain stem, medulla oblongata is the relay station for sensory nerves passing from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. Vital centers, cardiac, respiratory, vasomotor, reflex centers. Decussation of motor and sensory tracts. Now, see, when you study the cervical vertebra, okay, and I told you the vertebra, the odontoid process. If anyone is hung by by strangulating, or after that they hang that dead body in a tree or pole or anything. But when you commit a suicide, suicide or homicide, whatever it is, now after the odontoid process presses over the medulla oblongata, and see, its relay station for sensory nerves passing from the spinal cord to the cerebrum, vital centers of cardiac, respiratory, vasomotor, reflex centers. So, immediately, if that pressure of the odontoid process, if anyone commits a suicide, then these centers, because it's a vital center for cardiac, respiratory, vasomotor, reflex centers, decussation of motor and sensory tracts. Now, reticular formation, a collection of neurons in the brainstem, coordination of muscle activity, and selective awareness. Now, again, it's a repetition of the same picture. Now, cerebellum, situated behind the pons and the medulla. Now, this location, when you describe the brain, only describe like the cerebellum, you describe the cerebellum. Then you have to, in just point form, the cerebellum situated behind the pons and the medulla, two hemispheres united by the vermis, functions, coordination of voluntary muscular movement, posture and balance. This is the, I went to the reversed. So you can see the picture, the fourth ventricle, pons, medulla oblongata, behind it, the cerebellum. Now, spinal cord, elongated cylindrical part of the CNS, suspended in the vertebral canal surrounded by meninges and CSF, continues above as the medulla, extends from the upper border of C1 vertebra up to the lower border of the L1 vertebra, C1 to L1. That's the spinal cord. Now, this is the picture. The cerebrum is the midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, the cerebellum, spinal cord. It's very simple to draw the brain and the spinal cord. can just remember this is the cerebrum and midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. This is spinal cord from T1 to L1. C1 to L1, and this is the cerebellum. This is cerebellum. Spinal cord, lumbar puncture. So lumbar puncture can come as a short note. What is lumbar puncture? Now lumbar puncture, a procedure to get a sample of CSF for testing, done at the level of L2, L3 or L3, L4. L2, L3, L3, L4. Rootlets emerge that combine to form roots, and those combine to form one spinal nerve in one side. Yeah. So, this is the dura mater. This is spinal nerve. This is the arachnoid matter. This is dura mater. This is the pia mater and spinal cord. Now the sagittal section with the vertebral and the end of the spinal cord. From then, this is the phylum terminal. This is the phylum terminal. Phylum terminal, the spinal nerve. This is the dura mater in blue. This. Okay. Now, lower end of the dura, mater tube, phylum terminal, coccyx. Now, the spinal cord and spinal nerves. This is a picture, the cervical nerves, then the thoracic nerves, lumbar nerves, sacral and coccygeal nerves. The cauda equina, phylum terminal. Spinal cord internal structures. Anterior median fissure, posterior median septum, central canal in the center, grey matter in the middle, white matter in the periphery. If you see in the spinal cord as in the cross section, you will get all this. Second thing, in histology, there are 2 slides of spinal cord. If you have not seen it in this revision period, please see it. And the spinal cord, the descriptive is this. This matches with the slide which is in our lab. See, this is the posterior sensory nerve root. This is the anterior motor nerve root. Posterior is sensory and anterior is motor. Now this is the spinal nerve. This is spinal ganglion. The anterior white column, the anterior median fissure, anterior grey column, lateral white column, posterior grey column, posterior median septum. This is the posterior median septum. This is central canal. Now, spinal cord internal structures, grey matter, 2 anterior horns, 2 posterior horns, 2 lateral horns in thoracic, upper lumbar and sacral segments, 2 lateral horns in thoracic, upper lumbar and sacral segments. Cell bodies of the neurons are located in the sensory cells, lower motor neurons and connector neurons. Anterior grey horn transmits motor impulses sent from the cortex. Now, posterior grey horn receives the transmits sensory impulses to the cortex. Now, these are the things that it is the tracts, that is naturally it is in the cortex. Naturally, there is any transaction of the spinal cord or some fracture or injury, then you will find this motor and sensory losses. Yeah. One of the sensory nerve pathways from the skin to the cerebellum. Now you can see the sensory receptor in the skin. It goes to posterior root ganglion and ascends cell bodies in the medulla oblongata. It decussates, it crosses over sensory decussation, this is sensory receptor, sensory decussation to the thalamus, and you can see the basal nuclei and it goes to the cerebral cortex. Now peripheral spinal nerves, sensory posterior now the cerebral cortex, internal capsule, thalamus, basal nuclei. Now cell bodies in the medulla oblongata, posterior column here. Now peripheral spinal nerves, it goes here, decussation is there and crosses over and goes. Now this is skin with the sensory nerves, the motor end plates in skeletal muscles, the motor end, this is muscles. Now motor nerve fibers, the sensory nerve fibers, it combines and mixed nerve and posterior root ganglion, this is the connector neuron, the spinal cord and the anterior aspect of the spinal cord. Now spinal cord internal structures, white matter arranged in columns or tracts, ascending sensory tract, the lateral and anterior spinothalamic tract, anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tracts. This is the lateral and anterior, this is spinothalamic, from spine to the thalamus. Okay. These are very common, very common. If any questions come from brain nervous system, this is a part for tracts will come. Either it will be in anatomy or in your physiology. Descending motor tracts, ascending sensory tracts, and lateral and anterior spinothalamic tracts, anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tract. 3. Descending or motor tracts, anterior and lateral corticospinal tracts.